Welcome to the Jaffrey Civic Center. My name is Sean Driscoll. I'm on the board here at the Civic Center, and I'm the moderator for tonight's talk. This is the first talk in the 5th season of Stories to Share. And you can see the future speakers up there. I think we have a very exciting series for you this year. To my mind, at the center of a lot of these is this modern question of how do we achieve community and stay connected in this modern world? In other words, in the world of artificial intelligence and cell phones and algorithms, how do we do what we're doing here tonight? Now, I use my phone way too much. I am a doom scroller, so I'm looking at, I read tons of articles, I listen to lots of podcasts, I watch way too many videos. But for me, the cultural highlight of last year is when Dayton Duncan stood here and pointed to Mount Monadnock and said, that is our Umphalaus, our belly button, the center of our universe. And so, in the past year, my greatest cultural moment was here. And so I think that points out that, you know, culture is what we choose to do. What we, when we read a book, or we attend a movie, or we go to the theater, or we attend a talk, that's culture. And the algorithm can't give us culture, because the algorithm serves us things that it thinks we want to see based on a profile that we don't even really understand. And so when I read things on my phone, I'm simply acquiescing to the algorithm. I'm not making a cultural choice. But by coming here tonight, you have made a cultural choice. And we, the Jaffrey Civic Center, are incredibly enriched and thankful that you did that, right? That because you're here, the Civic Center has a purpose. So I really thank you for attending. So what we're going to do tonight is that John will come up and speak, and if their time allows at the end, he'll answer some questions. And then we will end no later than 6, but after the talk, there will be a reception in the conference room, graciously provided by Jean Duval and Nancy Beltate. And so we really encourage you to stay and talk and hang out for a while after the talk. We wouldn't be able to do this without our sponsors, right? So we're very thankful for them also. They are Beltate's, the Sanguines Bank of Walpole, and of course, the Monadnock Ledger Transcript. So we're very thankful for our sponsors. The gentleman who's speaking tonight sits right in the mesh of all of what I was just talking about. He was raised in Greenfield, New Hampshire, and attended South Meadow School where I teach. And then he went and studied at Colorado College, and then he got a PhD in comparative literature from the City University of New York system. But here's the remarkable thing. He returned to the Monadnock region. So in my generation of people, no one ever went to Colorado and came back. They went to Colorado and sent back like postcards saying like, the air is better, the sky is bigger, the skiing is incredible, you know, I'll never come home. But anyway, so, and since he's come back, he's, you know, the executive director of Historic Harrisville, which is, you know, one of the great organizations in the Monadnock region. Harrisville is that gem of a town. When people visit my father, we always take them to Harrisville because everyone should see Harrisville. And but we know, the people from here know that Harrisville wouldn't be Harrisville if it weren't for Historic Harrisville Inc. and Chick Colony and all the people who sit on their board and all the people that work for them. I don't know if you've ever looked at their website, but their website is really worth taking a look at. It's inspiring, it's beautiful, it's a really well done website. And in it, it sort of says, I cobbled some of this together, but it says that Historic Harrisville strives to preserve the town's historic significance and natural environment, and to enhance the community's spirit, quality of life, beauty and economic vitality of Harrisville through preservation, stewardship, community programming, and small business incubation. I can't think of a better mission than that, and I'm really looking forward. Please give a large Civic Center welcome to Mr. John Knight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It is really a treat to be here. That was such a nice introduction and a nice way to set the stage for precisely what I'm going to talk about. So thank you. Here we are. Can everybody hear me okay if I speak like this? This will work for everyone? Great. For the past couple months, as I've been thinking about what to say today, I've been serving on a review panel for a state-run preservation program called LCHIP. Each year, the program receives applications from all over the state for grants to restore historic buildings, and cumulatively, they've invested $65 million in preservation projects. They're really one of the leading historic preservation organizations in the state. This year, they have 24 applications, and my role is to go and see these buildings and help decide which ones to recommend. So a few weeks ago, I went to see this meeting house in Bow. Built in 1835, it's a typical 19th century meeting house. Inside, there are high curved ceilings, an incredible stove and chimney that runs the entire length of the room. The man in charge of the building is a volunteer in town and clearly admired the church and knew something about construction. But he wasn't a preservationist. Yet I got the sense that he was there, had filled out a rather arduous LCHIP application because this was his town, his home, and the building, a piece of it. And I agreed. It seemed like a worthy project. But about halfway through the conversation, I asked how the building was used. Oh, he said, the town has it available for weddings and events and town gatherings. Great, I said. And there was a beat. But actually, it hasn't been used since 2014, he admitted. In fact, we haven't had any inquiries since COVID. I nodded and looked again at the building. It was hard to imagine anything happening in it. There was no bathrooms, no heat except the stove. The front hallway was covered in dead ladybugs that crunched under our feet. Outside, it was one of only 3 buildings next to an empty road. It wasn't in the center of town, and 2 houses on either side of the church were dark. A truck drove by at 40 miles an hour, tires whizzing. Vitality is now a word I use all the time. Mostly, I use it to describe a goal that I have as the director of Historic Harrisville. I want our buildings and our work to engender vitality of all sorts: economic, social, cultural, familial. I like it because it connotes action, but also because it's something fundamentally ongoing. Vitality is not a one-and-done chore, but a process of adaptation and change rooted in sensitivity to what is needed and where the possibilities lie. For these reasons, rural vitality strikes me as especially interesting. Our resources are at once vast and limited. We have natural beauty, clean water, good timber, fresh air, land in conservation, and land available for development. There's also a meaningful history here, a formidable culture of hard work and savvy practicality. But there are only so many jobs. Our schools suffer low enrollment. Our centers of commerce are modest, and we inevitably send much of our money away to national or international corporations for most of our consumable goods. All this means that rural vitality exists where local institutions and systems have been devised to serve very specific purposes in very specific ways. When people harness the resources of a place to adequately make up for what is missing or to help whomever is struggling. In turn, this creates a sense of identity and belonging, perhaps even a sense of pride, which then compels people to continue to find solutions and create opportunity. These two things, resource adaptation and what I'll call local pride, strike me as the ingredients of rural vitality. And together, they can work to keep a place adapting and thriving. Now, historic preservation has many goals, and rural vitality is not always one of them. But if vitality is a goal for a rural community, then what role does historic preservation have to play? Beyond safeguarding architecture and understanding the past, in what capacity does preservation anticipate the future? How might it build on the resources already here and unite disparate groups of people? And further, how might something like rural vitality be measured? Is there a more concrete way to discuss things like belonging and resource adaptation? Could this be turned into a kind of economic system in which value is not merely a financial proposition, but a communal one? In other words, might we use the concept of rural vitality to talk intelligently about the economics of community? In considering these questions, Harrisville is an interesting case study. In many ways, it seems that a certain level of vitality has already been achieved. If you've been there recently, you've noticed that the mills are mostly full, with almost all of their windows. The general store is busy, even if the heat is at times questionable. There's a post office, a church, an elementary school, and, especially telling, our annual town meetings are always well-attended and lively. But the town also faces considerable pressures. The enrollment at the elementary school is declining. Many people who live in town have jobs elsewhere. There's no safe walkways along an increasingly fast state road. Our housing stock is in extremely short supply. Our median age is old. These difficulties are not unique, nor, I think, are the resources that have given the town so much to be proud of. So perhaps Harrisville is not only an example, but a model, both for what has been done and for approaches to the significant work still to come. I suspect many of you know the basic history of the town, but let me rehash, or perhaps highlight, a few useful pieces. The first mill was built there in 1774 by a man named Abel Twitchell, who came from Sherborne, Massachusetts, about a decade after the French and Indian War in this area. That first one was a grist and sawmill, but over the next 70 years, 5 more mills were built on the little stream that flows out of Harrisville Pond, mostly by the Harris family, who moved to the area shortly after Twitchell. 2 of those mills still stand. The Twitchells and the Harrises were decent businessmen, though they got themselves mired in local politics and feuds. By the early 20th century, brothers were competing against brothers, illness had taken its toll, and there had been at least one mysterious fire. But what the early mill owners understood were distinct geographical resources of this place, namely water and elevation, or rather, a quick change in elevation. The town sits on a ridgeline between the Connecticut and Merrimack river basins. Water from Lake Nubinusett flows through Harrisville Pond underneath these mills and drops into Lake Scatutucky. Right here, in what is now the village, the water drops 150 feet in about 1/8 of a mile. This translates to about 4 inches in elevation for every foot of traveling. In other words, it's steep. If you've ever walked from Lake Scatutucky up to the Harrisville General Store, you know exactly what I mean. So the Twitchells and Harrises put all this water and elevation to use, and the economy at the time supported them. Local sheep herding was still prosperous, and the mills had plenty of orders for government blue in the 1860s. For a time, there was a bustling chair business. Still, the town itself didn't exist. The land was in Dublin, Nelson, Marlborough, and it wasn't until 1870 that Harrisville splintered off for the sake of a railroad. Mill owners wanted a direct route to outside markets. Excuse me. But the other residents of Dublin and Nelson refused to pay the railroad line. So the mill owners and workers and farmers seceded and formed a new town. This is, I think, already instructive. The town originated in a dramatic moment of shared economic purpose. Can you imagine if a group of people who lived in the immediate vicinity of the old Carr's store at the intersection of 101 and 137 decided to make their own town? It would be chaos. I don't think it was much different in 1870. The people who wanted their own municipality had to believe so fervently in the resources of their land and in the capacity of their residents that the tremendous risk and considerable difficulty of first seceding and then establishing a new government was worth the hassle. The risk of this move was baked right into the very fabric of the town, as was a sense of identity. Both of these things, risk and pride, resurfaced 100 years later. As the fortunes of the Harris clan deteriorated toward the end of the 19th century, the colonies, a family firmly established in Keene, began purchasing the mills and building new ones. But throughout the 20th century, the woolen industry slowly and then rapidly declined. Local sheep herding faltered, the automobile shut down the railroad, and manufacturing shifted decisively toward the global and the synthetic. In 1960, Cheshire Mills employed about 135 people and occupied 25 buildings. In 1970, it filed for bankruptcy, and without exaggeration, Yankee Magazine ran the headline, "Town for Sale." One of the things that I love about places is that everything built in them is fundamentally a product of that place. Obviously, the materials and designs and people and skills are imported, but the actualization of a building is always precisely local. I like this because it means that towns are custom-made to fit. They have in their genesis many of the aspects that make them worthwhile. In Harrisville, the mills harnessed a resource, which in turn gave people a reason to build churches and houses and chicken farms and a general store. All of these buildings had a purpose, which meant that they always retain potential. In a sense, the place where water flowed downhill at a rate of 4 inches a foot had wrought a new feature, not a geological one, but an architectural one. There were large brick and granite buildings, some of them equipped to generate their own electricity, some of them designed to be lived in, some designed to make things in. This isn't a natural resource, but it's close. Human beings, natural creatures, using what is at hand in the natural world, develop these structures in situ. Now, you may, and would be right to, object. Aren't I being a bit grand? What good are a bunch of empty buildings if there's no industry to support their use? Indeed. And this brings up another aspect of vitality, luck. Or maybe it's better to call it inspiration, boredom, whimsy, or perhaps it's much more mundane, simply an inclination to do something because it needs doing, or because the challenge of doing something tricky is, for whatever human reason, appealing. Was this not the reason that Abel Twitchell lit out from his secure family farm in Massachusetts and built a rickety mill on a gorge in southern New Hampshire? When I asked Chick Colony why he started Historic Harrisville with his friend Jim Putnam, he tells me because the problem was interesting. It was the entire town on the line. What this suggests is that Chick and Jim saw that these buildings were worth something. And I think that they understood that if they were knocked down, or fell down, not only would they be gone forever, but that in their place, new structures would be built that responded to the moment of the 1970s, a moment when small towns weren't worth very much in the global engine of the new. This means that whatever might have been built, or not built, would inherently retain this kind of devaluation for the place that Chick and Jim loved. Which brings me back to the word pride. I'm using this word a bit loosely to mean both a sense of identity and a certain kind of meaning a place can have. Somehow, places get their hooks in us. We each end up caring about them. Why is this? There's a French philosopher I always think about when this question comes up, named Gaston Bachelard. In 1958, he wrote a book called The Poetics of Space, and that argues human psyches are intensely formed by the built spaces we live in, especially those of our childhood. Architecture determines our dreams, our poetic sensibility, our sense of self. Our homes shelter our daydreams, he writes, and the values that belong to daydreaming mark humanity in its depths. This guy was a dilettante who studied chemistry and physics and literature, but my favorite piece of his biography is that he worked as a postal clerk, which has always struck me as somehow relevant. In any case, somehow these buildings got lodged in Chick and Jim and a few others, and an opportunity found these young men, all in their 20s, looking for something worthwhile to do. They founded Historic Harrisville in 1971 and devised two primary goals: to preserve, as a document of American culture, this 19th century textile town, and to rejuvenate that town as a self-sufficient and fulfilling place to live and work. At the time, there was not a playbook for this kind of thing, and their plan was visionary. It recognized the extraordinary resources that already existed, which was attracting new residents who wanted to live in the country, and compared these resources with the demolition that was happening around the state: industrial mill buildings and houses being flattened for new builds. It's clear, they noted, in their original operating plan, that simple prosperity and unplanned progress are potentially as threatening to the village as was the closing of Cheshire Mills. They started out with 6 buildings and raised $350,000 to renovate them. In 3 years, these buildings were leased to small businesses and craftsmen and were beginning to generate small revenue. This is the model that Historic Harrisville still uses and is at the core of our operations. In the following 50 years, they took on 20 more buildings, created an affordable housing program, organized against a highway, created historic covenants, took on running a general store. HHI Properties now house about 30 local businesses, including a daycare and post office, and it gladly pays over $100,000 in taxes to the town each year. Chick says he never anticipated any of this specifically, but many of these aspects are precisely what continues to make Harrisville a fulfilling place to live and work. The first time I came to Harrisville, I was 31 years old. I had grown up in Greenfield, as Sean said, but Harrisville was just far enough away that I don't ever recall going there as a boy. But in 2018, I was living in New York City, working in book publishing, and finishing a doctorate in comparative literature. I was tired of the city and wanted to be back in the country. My now wife and I were hoping to buy a place in the Hudson Valley, but we were striking out, mostly because we were having a hard time imagining living in a place that emptied out on Sunday afternoon when everyone went back to the work in the city. It didn't feel like a real place to us. We spent the fall with my parents in the old farmhouse where I grew up, and one afternoon came for lunch at the general store. We walked around the canal, we marveled at the brick. "This place," Rebecca said. I didn't know a thing about Historic Harrisville at the time, or any bit of the history I've just told you. But the town felt good, felt really good. Not just because it was beautiful, but because there was activity. People seemed to care about it. There was vitality. Only now do I understand that this was no accident. The entire experience I had that October afternoon was set forth in the operating plan of 1971. To be truly successful, the founders of HHI wrote, the goals of historic Harrisville must become the concern of the people of Harrisville. This strikes me as one of the more prescient aspects of their plan, to understand that historic preservation is as much about people as it is about buildings. It is also one of the more difficult goals to realize. HHI now counts about 650 incorporators, people who are friends and supporters. But many people who live in Harrisville are not involved in historic Harrisville, and a good number actively dislike the organization. However, it is extremely rare to meet someone in Harrisville who doesn't feel very strongly about where they live, about the character of the town, its beauty and rural attributes, about its close-knit communities, of which there are many. I often think that historic Harrisville's success is in part measured by the people who don't care about historic Harrisville, or don't even know that it exists, but who nonetheless take pride in Harrisville. That is vitality. But let me try to be more specific about what this means, what it really looks like. Historic Harrisville bought the general store, the Harrisville General Store, in the year 2000. It had been closed for nearly a decade, and there was concern that it would be bought and turned into offices or a mobile gas station. For 8 years, the space was leased to store operators, but the finances of running a general store have never been good, especially if you want to pay the people who work there a decent wage. In 2008, HHI took over the operation and has been slowly building the business ever since. And this is one of the critical advantages of nonprofit management of town resources. HHI could both field losses and raise capital through donations. The goals of a nonprofit running a general store are not to turn a profit, but to sustain the town. And every year, the Friends of the General Store provide essential income to keep it operational. In a sense, the store really belongs to the people in town who patronize it. HHI is merely a steward of this resource. It's worth carving this out into a few metrics. When you spend $1 at the Harrisville General Store, 50% of it stays in Harrisville. This pays for wages. Most of the people who work at the Harrisville General Store live in Harrisville. Pays for taxes, local produce and products, and reinvestment in Harrisville property. 75% of that dollar stays in New Hampshire. When you buy something on Amazon, all of your money leaves town. But this is only one way to look at it. The general store is open 7 days a week, year-round. Last year, it had about 50,000 sales. That's not dollars, but the actual number of times somebody bought something. Most of these purchases came between the hours of 11:30 and 1:30. Lunchtime. Let's say that about two-thirds of the purchases were for lunch, and that 80% of those lunchtime meals were shared. That means that last year, 26,400 meals were shared in Harrisville. What did all those people talk about? Perhaps they laughed together. Perhaps they consoled one another. Perhaps they met for the first time. Maybe they discussed town politics or new initiatives. No doubt they gossiped. Maybe they reconnected or simply relaxed being out of the house and with other people. Here's a metric of rural vitality. How often do people eat lunch together? One of historic Harrisville's tenants is the Harrisville Children's Center. This extraordinary daycare was also founded in 1971 and has lived in the boarding house built for mill workers at the center of town since 1985. This program provides exceptional care for children aged 6 weeks to 6 years. Currently, it has 46 students, and each year graduates about 15 kids. Since inception, the daycare has served somewhere around 2,500 children and their families. Given those numbers, we could consider how much money has come into the town by way of tuition, or how many hours this has provided for young parents to do their work and take care of their families. We could think about those 2,500 children who received exquisite attention in their lives when their brains were developing at a rate of 1 million connections every second. We could focus on how much money was saved by not erecting a new building to house this program. But consider instead the quality of the sound that young children make when they are playing, and place this at the very center of a village. Screams and whoops and cries and laughter, pots and pans as drums, the sound of singing. Another metric of rural vitality. How often do you hear children? One of Historic Harrisville's exciting projects is the renovation of St. Denis Church at the center of town. This is a deconsecrated Catholic church that was built in 1895 with tall stained glass windows donated by local families. The building has been vacant since 2007, and for years, Historic Harrisville has struggled to adapt it for modern use without compromising its historic integrity. The church has no plumbing, no ADA access. Finally, someone had the brilliant idea to use the adjacent building as the place for bathrooms and to connect the two with a deck. Amazingly, this breakthrough coincided with a successful grant application to the New Hampshire Community Development Finance Authority. The building is now scheduled to open as the Village Community Center in the coming year. It has gone through an incredible transformation. We've restored all the stained glass windows, rewired it, installed new heating and cooling, gutted and renovated the basement, and dug a massive drainage solution around the perimeter. I anticipate not only a slew of cultural events, talks, performances, concerts, dinners, movie nights, but support groups and health services, especially for seniors. We're devising an after-school program for the local elementary school and putting together workshops that will focus on local knowledge. Historic Harrisville has been holding this property for nearly 2 decades without knowing how it could be used. And suddenly, we have been able to invest nearly $1 million right into the center of town, in the building itself, and also in the remarkable range of the people, the craftsmen, who have carried out this work. Next year, it will again be open to the public, with staff dedicated to noticing the needs and possibilities in town and devising ways to address them. To be able to hold vacant property is one of the distinct services of an organization like Historic Harrisville. Without this capacity or willingness, we would never have arrived at this solution for this church. But now, this public building can again serve its public. That picture on the left, your left, my right, that's from 1921. And this other picture I took yesterday. In this vein, one of my favorite buildings in Harrisville is this one. It's known as the Mackey House and was built in 1879. It was given to Historic Harrisville in 2002 and has been vacant ever since. The reason for this vacancy is again the distinct historic integrity of the property, namely that it is wedged right between a state road and a wetland. It has no septic system or functional well, and no land to put either of these things on. Furthermore, it's in what you might call rough shape. Any other organization tasked with this property would in all likelihood tear it down. In for-profit economic terms, it's worse than worthless. Even the state would like to demolish it and straighten out their road coming down the hill. This would make the road easier to plow. It would also mean that cars would arrive in town at about 50 miles an hour. Historic Harrisville has held onto this property for 25 years. And over the course of that time, it has paid about $25,000 in taxes on it and has spent about $10,000 on failed septic plans and hopeful architectural studies. But consider the potential. there could be 2 new apartments in this building, one of them the perfect size for a family. In a town of 1,000 people, this is not insignificant. Not only does the building serve as a gatehouse to the town, but architecturally, it matches the other Greek Revival buildings that were constructed here around the turn of the century for mill workers. It might be easier to tear a house like this down and build a new structure in its place. I've talked with some builders and electricians who recommend this without reservation. But others say not so fast. The bones of this house are good. The timbers are strong. The stone foundation is intact. The rooms are well proportioned and well designed. There is beautiful wallpaper and plaster that is still very good. It looks terrible, and it smells even worse. And I think many people have grown accustomed to the idea that it is not worth anything because it has been empty for so long. But consider this house, just up the road. This too was a building to tear down. Too close to the road, too shabby, too difficult to install a septic system, too much lead paint to scrape away. And it was bad in there too. But these are all the people who volunteered to clean it up, to put it back together, and to reclaim the value that a place to live can provide a small town. It is now 2 apartments, a studio and a 3-bedroom, and a crucial part of Historic Harrisville's affordable housing program, which does not adopt a blanket national standard of eligibility, but prioritizes people who work in Harrisville. Again, these buildings are extant resources, significant resources, if only they can be seen as a place to live rather than a place to tear down. What I'm talking about here is what it means to have a home, a place where a person can be healthy and secure, a place where one can grow socially and personally, where there is purpose and a reason to be engaged, where participation in civic activity not only has consequence, but resonates collectively and justifies hours and hours of volunteering. A home is not only the experience of the day-to-day, but provides the narrative backbone of our lives. Since being asked to give this talk, I spent about a month writing it, and even longer thinking about what I would say. And after I had finished it this week, I asked ChatGPT to write a version of it for me. I spent about 1.5 minutes giving it some background information on Historic Harrisville, feeding it a few documents about preservation and our recent projects, and instructed it to write me an hour-long presentation on rural vitality. It thought briefly, and in less than a minute, I had a speech. I spent another 10 minutes telling it to refine the talk, change paragraphs, reframe arguments and approaches, reconsider a point. And after a total of 15, maybe 20 minutes, I had a perfectly serviceable talk. Then I had it make me a slideshow and even write me a joke to use at the very beginning of the talk to break the ice. The fact that I can have a robot write me a decent hour-long speech in less than half the time it takes to deliver that speech is, of course, a radical change in our world. And one of the things that I think this means is that information is now at a discount. My whole life, information has been at a premium. My entire education and career has been a matter of learning to parse, regurgitate, and create this material, which has coincided with the virtual elimination of time and distance in the activity of communicating. The internet and our phones have collapsed those physical dimensions. But add to this digital reality a robot that can produce this information infinitely faster than a human, essentially matching the metaphysical laws of this virtual world in which time and space don't exist. And suddenly, information becomes dirt cheap. I can create, though that's not really the right word, I can order an hour-long speech on rural vitality in 15 minutes. In fact, any of us can. One possible consequence of this seismic shift is that this other reality, the physical one, stands to become dramatically more valuable. Pretty soon, there will be nothing I can do on the internet or on a computer that a robot can't do just as well. In fact, most likely, much better. But here's the joke ChatGPT wrote for me. Billed as a playful, safe bet. Imagine I'm a robot. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. When people hear I work in historic preservation, they often ask, so what exactly do you do? And I tell them, mostly, I help people argue about paint colors, but with a nonprofit tax status. After I had ChatGPT write me a speech, I went back to work. I walked up the hill and sorted out how to improve parking around the community center and where lights should be placed inside the building. I inspected metal pipes in the daycare and decided which ones to replace to mitigate any traces of lead in the drinking water. I chatted with a man about his recent back injury and whether he had all the wood he needed for the winter. I drove to town hall and engaged a delicate conversation about changing town ordinances around affordable housing. I went to the general store and helped move tables for a community dinner that night and tested out our new soft serve machine. The whole time I was talking with people, listening to their concerns, relating with them about their families and their work, asking their opinions about the best way to get things done, asking them to teach me about things like drainage and soft serve and plumbing, and most of all, connecting with them all about our home. I noticed their concerns and also felt content in myself. My opinions were valued. I enjoyed listening to what others had to say, even if I didn't agree with them. And the decisions I was able to make with other people were better than any I could make on my own. All of this is extremely intricate work, and something that I, as a human, am wonderfully equipped to do. I hope, that we are a very long way from a robot who could do all of this better than me, or any of you. The thing that gave me a reason to do this work, to be engaged, to have purpose, was the fact of this architecture. These natural resources, a town that is beautiful, a place that I proudly call home. This physical world of old buildings provides an exceptional value. Concern and meaning and human interaction. You cannot get these things online. What this means for the next 50 years, I have no idea. And there are many ways I can imagine a revaluation of the physical manifesting in our lives. But one thing that seems certain is that our homes and the towns we live in will continue to be the arenas of our thoughts and experiences, of our dreams, and hopefully a source of pride. And I believe that this is the raw stuff of vitality. Which brings me back to the man in Bow and the empty meeting house. There are hundreds of empty churches like this all over the state. And I'm not saying they should all be saved. But in the past year, I've found a new appreciation for the possibilities of a building, especially one built as a resource, one with a history, one that might help to define someone's home. And even though we don't know what the future might bring, or perhaps especially because we can't know it, I've come to appreciate the task of seeding that future with the very structures and dreams and bit of pride that might very well keep it vital. Again and again in my life, I find that the hardest part of any project or activity is getting it started. The wall between something and not something is so thick and tall. How much it matters to use what we already have. Perhaps the role of historic preservation is not only the hard work of a nonprofit, the willingness to take on the difficult building projects, the meticulousness of brickwork and timber framing and yes, paint colors, of devising ways and reasons that people can and will want to use their buildings together. Perhaps the real role is to be optimistic. Thank you.
We have time for a couple questions. We just have to restate the questions so that they can end up on the video. So, would anyone like to ask a question? Kate?
Kate from Peter Road, affordable housing question. So those two houses, you said, I think neither of them had septic or plumbing, whatever. So how did you resolve those questions, or how would you resolve
Just
that?
repeat the question.
Yeah, how did we resolve the septic problem for those buildings that we did successfully turn into affordable housing? Those actually had more land than the Mackey house.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to put it, there's enough of a setback there, so we were able to put it in the back. It was still tight, and I think they had to get variances for them. And they had to make two separate systems. And I think that was also part of it because of the size. So there's separate systems for those two houses there. Yeah.
Does Harrisville have any town sewer?
No, there's no town sewer, no town water, none of that. And we do have again, a new plan for the septic system at Mackey House that I'm optimistic about. And that requires running the whole system onto an adjacent property,
Yeah.
which is also something that happens a lot. Yeah.
So I loved your talk, John. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And what's going on in my head has to do with the seed of inspiration that you are now carrying forward. And so you said really early on that what historic Harrisville was and has launched could be a model for like a town like Bow. I'm just really curious about that nexus, because you're able to step into something that was created.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any thoughts about how that inspiration could be carried to other towns to help them get a spark? I'm about that. That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah.
I'll just give a little.
Right. What is the what's the model that other towns could use, basically?
Yes, perfect.
I think that is really specific to the town, to what resources are in the town, what the strengths of that town are. And when I think about the success of Historic Harrisville, it began as a real recognition and appreciation of those resources. And so I think that there's that, and that means, in Harrisville, using these mill buildings for manufacturing. In Bow, I actually shouldn't talk about Bow. I'm not really sure what they're going to do. That's a tough situation. But I think that trying to figure out what are the resources already existing in a community, be it people, knowledge, structures, natural resources, and then how to manage that is not just extractive. But that is geared entirely toward the health of that community, which I think is also really part of what the founders of Historic Harrisville understood, that making the town a healthy place to live and work, that living and working part is really important. Not just inviting people in as tourists. They've always been really adamant that Historic Harrisville is not a museum. So it's trying to, I think, recognize what's unique about a town, and then devising systems that can allow for long time and no money, or to at least create excitement around an idea that then could maybe bring money in. Yeah.
Of the challenges that you faced in your role, which has been the most surprising or unexpected?
That's a nice question. What has been, of the challenges I've faced in this role, which has been the most surprising or unexpected? I've become the person that everybody comes to in town when something goes wrong. Even when it has nothing to do with Historic Harrisville. Maybe especially that. So that's surprising. or at least I didn't quite anticipate that much of it. But there's another side of that coin too. I mean, people are also really grateful to what we're doing, and so I hear about that a lot. And I didn't anticipate that either. Yeah.
One more question?
Sure. Yeah.
I was talking to John before the talk started. My Finnish grandparents lived in Harrisville from early 1900s. They died in the late 1950s. They lived down the hill from the mill on the left, and I think I saw the house. It was the one that was duplex, and when they left it in the 50s, it wasn't a mess. It was really tight and pleasant and warm and welcoming. It didn't look at all like that, but I'm pretty darn sure that was my grandpa.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Gelfand. I'm a board member of the Hadley Civic Center. And I would like to thank you, John, for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
As a small
my
token of
gosh.
our appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you, that's so
And
kind.
As you know, we don't pay our speakers. I have a few announcements. If you suffer me a little bit more, the annual fall show, what you see in our auditorium here. Roz Parks exhibit is in the hallway in the cases and so forth. Please spend a moment and have a look at those. And sign up with Laura at the check-in table for our next Stories to Share if you're interested. And Kathy Bollerud is going to be speaking, and Justine, she's also part of your board as well. But she's going to be speaking on a different topic, the accidental humanitarian 15 years in a Himalayan village. With that, I'd also like to thank Laura and Karen, our director and assistant director, for all they do, and Jeanne Duval for all she does. It's more than just preparing the reception afterwards, it's a lot. And also my wife, who's not here, but did help with the reception.
We got it on tape that you thanked her, so you're okay.
Okay. So please join us, and if you have other questions, I'm sure John will entertain them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.